Hello, it's just me today to talk about location tracking. It's uh, Friday, October 25th, 2024. And the greatest article, I think, is this. I think it's Wired. No, it's Krebs on Security. I've been talking about this in my classes for a while. Has a big article that is amazing about location tracking called the Global Surveillance Free for All in Mobile Ad Data. Uh, And this is a lawsuit that comes from New Jersey law enforcement officers because there was a law passed in New Jersey that law enforcement officers should be allowed to get their personal data out of these data brokers. And they demonstrated that their data is still in there. So they're suing a bunch of them, 151 consumer data brokers. And one defendant, Babel Street, allows customers to draw a digital polygon around any location on a map and view a history of mobile devices seen coming into and out of the affected area. So you can use a trial version of it, and an investigator was able to track visitors to a mosque and employees at an abortion clinic and law enforcement officers. And it can find out who is who by watching where you go at night. There's a night mode that shows where the phone stops moving at night, so you can tell where people sleep, so you can easily identify people. And so this is interesting. I heard about this for years, and I wondered how it worked. Now, one part that I understood is the apps have location data. Someone turned on and they send that back. So that I could understand. And you could perhaps remove apps like that from your phone and be safe. But it turns out that the much larger problem is ads on web pages. When you load a web page on your phone, it loads the page and then it loads a frame where they're going to put an ad and they don't know what ad to put in there. So they send bid requests out to hundreds of entities around the world while your browser is opening, saying, here's a chance to put an ad on a page. So would you like to bid for it? And here's this person's location history. Here's their demographic information, their age, the other things they've been doing. So it takes that whole profile of you and sends it to hundreds of people so they can all automatically choose who's going to pay the most to put an ad on this page. And then they put an ad on the page. So that is like an amazing amount of data sent to a lot of people very frequently on your phone. And data brokers, therefore, can locate 80% of Android devices and 25% of Apple phones because Apple implemented something called App Tracking Transparency recently that requires apps to get affirmative consent before they can track users. So Senator Ron Wyden from Oregon, of course, is always at the front of this. He wants Congress to regulate data brokers. And he says that's created this current privacy crisis, the fact that the government has not regulated data brokers. So you can disable this in both Android and iPhones, and there's instructions at the end of this article at krebsonsecurity.com. So anyway, I thought this was very interesting. I've heard about this for years, and I've never had so much detail of exactly how it works. Hospitals have been getting hit by ransomware a lot more. They've infected 389 healthcare organizations this fiscal year, and they now know that it's putting patients' lives at risk and costing facilities around $1 million a day in downtime, according to Microsoft. And they now have measurements of how many people are hurt by this medically. Stroke code activation at hospitals close to one suffering from ransomware infection jumped from 59 to 103. Cardiac arrests increased 81%, and survival rates for out-of-hospital cardiac arrests with favorable neurological outcomes plummeted from 40% to 4.5%. So that's an enormous amount of documented medical harm caused by these ransomware attacks. And the best solution I read about is that they need to switch to strong two-factor authentication because it mostly comes in through phishing. But anyway, I think the cybersecurity of medical facilities is becoming a very urgent need. Google DeepMind is building an AI to perform negotiation among people that disagree. And so in a test, they found that if you let both sides state their positions in some argument about politics or anything else, and then they average that use an AI to summarize these two statements and find the common ground, and then ask both sides if they can agree on this combined statement and go through iterations of this, it turns out to be more effective than a human mediator at causing people to come to some kind of compromise. So that sounds useful. And here, there's an article here let me find out where it's at. Yeah, the Hacker News has one explaining what I was talking about, how if you want to stop ransomware, probably the best thing to do is get multi-factor authentication and get strong multi-factor authentication, not SMS based. I have just finished attending the convention here, SaintCon, and one thing I learned at it, which I didn't know, is there's a new thing called the API Sec University. That's a free API security university. It sounds more or less like modeled after the Web Security Academy that I'm already using, so I have to investigate this. It sounds great. I already have some API security projects in my mobile device hacking class, and I may include more from this free resource. So the Ford CEO drives a Chinese electric vehicle and he doesn't want to give it up. This is very interesting. He says, I drive the Xiaomi. We flew one from Shanghai to Chicago and I've been driving it for 6 months now and I don't want to give it up. And he says 70% of all the electric cars on the globe are made from China. And apparently they're good. I've heard they're very difficult to get in the West due to tariffs and sanctions and stuff, but somehow the Ford CEO got one. So that's interesting. Google has offered its AI watermarking tech. We've been talking about this for about a year, where there'll be some way to watermark things that are produced by artificial intelligence. And what this does is pretty interesting and subtle. It's called Synth ID, and it is intended, it can watermark images, but it can also watermark text produced by something like ChatGPT. And what it does is it biases the selection of the words. So the words are not chosen with just a random variation as usual, but there's a key chosen, and it has a slight tendency to choose a certain pattern of words. And they claim this doesn't decrease the quality of the output significantly, but it does create a detectable pattern, so it's effectively watermarked by calculating statistics on the words that are coming out. So that sounds pretty clever. And I wonder if it's going to be easy to remove this watermark. But it's a pretty clever way to put a watermark in text, which I would have thought is a pretty difficult problem. And the last one is an AI story. Claude has updated with a problem-solving tool. And so this will actually now, I've often complained that when you write code with something like ChatGPT or Gemini, it will produce code and then it will give you a page saying the code works, and it doesn't actually run the code to see that it does work, and frequently it doesn't run. So Claude now has a code sandbox so it can write and run JavaScript code. So you could say, write code to solve this problem, and it will then write the code and execute the code, and then offer step-by-step insights and verify answers mathematically. And I've been checking Claude, and Claude really does seem to break every question into little steps and explain them step by step, which is a much more promising technique than the other chat models that try to understand a whole paragraph and usually get it wrong. So, or at least frequently get it wrong. So this seems like a big step forward. If it would actually write code and run the code to get an answer, it might be able to do logical and mathematical problems, which these large language models are very bad at right now. So that's all the stories I had for you for today. There'll be another one of these on Tuesday.